The rain had not stopped for 3 days when Eliza Harrow found the letter on her doorstep. It bore no return address, only her name written in an elegant hand across a thick cream envelope. Inside, the parchment smelled faintly of salt and age. To Miss Eliza Harrow of Cambridge. You are hereby informed that you are the sole heir to Greystone Manor, Devonshire. Eliza frowned. She had no relatives in Devon. Her parents had both passed away years ago, and she was certain her family tree held no one named Greystone. She set the letter aside, but something about the phrasing unsettled her. Sole heir, as if everyone else was gone. That night, curiosity overcame reason. She searched the name online and found only fragments of old records. Greystone Manor, a coastal estate built in 1832 by the Greystone family, now listed as abandoned, ownership pending. No photographs, no living residents. The following morning, another letter arrived, this time hand-delivered, though no one had seen the messenger. It contained a single brass key and a note scrawled in ink that bled slightly from the damp. Return before the next full moon. The house remembers its own. Eliza's breath caught. It was absurd, and yet a strange pull urged her to go. Perhaps it was the lawyer in her seeking the truth behind legal error, or perhaps something deeper, a whisper from the blood she never knew flowed in her veins. 2 days later, she stood at the edge of the Devon cliffs. The sea crashed below, and mist coiled through the air like smoke. There, rising from the fog, was Greystone Manor, vast, grey, and silent, its windows staring like hollow eyes across the shore. As she crossed the rusted gates, the key turned easily in her hand. The heavy doors creaked open, exhaling a gust of air that smelled of brine and long-forgotten dust. Inside, the hall was lined with portraits. Every one of them bore the same haunting eyes, grey-blue, like hers. A sudden chill swept through her as the door closed behind her on its own. Somewhere in the distance, a grandfather clock struck midnight. And though the air was still, the faint echo of footsteps began to move along the corridor above. The morning light filtered weakly through the dusty drapes when Eliza awoke on the grand chaise in the main hall. She had not remembered falling asleep. The fire in the hearth had long gone out, yet she felt a faint warmth in the air, as though someone had been there moments before. She rose, brushing dust from her coat, and noticed one of the portraits hanging crooked on the far wall. It was a woman, painted in muted tones, wearing a high-collared gown of deep blue. Her expression was unreadable, but the resemblance was unmistakable. The woman could have been Eliza's reflection. Below the frame, a brass plaque read, Lady Eleanor Greystone, 1846. Eliza leaned closer, tracing the edge of the frame, when she noticed something peculiar. The canvas was slightly lifted at the corner. She pulled it gently aside, revealing a narrow slit in the wallpaper. Inside was an envelope, yellowed with age and sealed with red wax. The seal bore the same crest as the key she had been given, a raven perched on a crown. With trembling hands, she broke the seal. The letter within was written in faded ink, its words slanted and hurried. To whomever bears our name, beware the stroke of midnight. The manor keeps the count of its heirs, and those who linger beneath its roof must pay the tithe of blood. The eldest shall not inherit peace, but penance. A floorboard creaked behind her. Eliza froze, the letter still in her hand. Slowly, she turned, half expecting a servant or caretaker, but the hall was empty. Only the faint whisper of the sea pressed against the windows. She tried to laugh at her own nerves and stepped back from the portrait. That was when she saw it. The painted eyes, Eleanor's eyes, were no longer fixed ahead. They had shifted slightly, looking down at Eliza's hand where the letter trembled. Her pulse quickened. She backed away, nearly stumbling into another frame behind her. The portraits seemed closer than before, their faces dim in the weak light, each one staring as though in silent judgment. In a rush of unease, Eliza fled into the next room, a long corridor that led to the library. Dust motes swirled in the dim air as she entered. Tall shelves lined the walls, heavy with books bound in leather, their titles half faded by time. On the central desk lay a single open volume, though no one could have been there to read it. The pages were covered in neat handwriting, and at the top of the first line, her breath caught. Diary of Lady Eleanor Greystone. The ink shimmered faintly as though freshly written. Outside, the clock struck 12 again, though she was certain it was still morning. And from somewhere deep within the manor, the echo of footsteps began once more, steady, slow, and coming closer. Eliza's fingers trembled as she touched the edge of the diary. Its leather binding was soft with age, and the scent of faded ink filled the room. She hesitated before turning the first page, uncertain if she was ready to read the words of a woman whose eyes still seemed to follow her from the portrait hall. October, 1845. I fear the house has begun to whisper again. The opening line made Eliza's throat tighten. The handwriting was neat yet restless, the kind of script born of sleepless nights. My husband, Lord Greystone, insists that the sounds are the sea. But I know better. It is the house, it breathes, it remembers. The curse of our line cannot be silenced by walls or distance. A soft gust of air passed behind Eliza. She turned sharply, but nothing moved. Only the heavy curtains swayed slightly, though the windows were closed. She forced herself to read on. They say the air must remain until the moon turns red above the sea, or the manor will call another in their place. My sister fled before her time and the waves took her. I have begun to dream of hands reaching from the water. The words blurred for a moment as Eliza's vision swam. She rubbed her eyes, but the ink seemed to ripple across the page as if alive. From somewhere deep within the house, a clock began to tick, slow, heavy, deliberate. Yet Eliza could not recall seeing any clocks in the library. She rose, clutching the diary, and followed the sound into a narrow corridor lined with wooden panels. It was colder here, the air sharp and metallic. The ticking grew louder until she reached a small door at the end of the passage. It opened with a reluctant groan. Beyond was a dim chamber lit only by a skylight veiled in dust. In the center stood a grand clock, its pendulum unmoving, its hands fixed at 12. The casing was carved with ravens and roses. But what made Eliza's breath falter was the engraving beneath the clock face, for the heir who never sleeps. A faint scratching sound came from inside the clock. She stepped closer. The sound grew sharper, like fingernails against wood. Eliza, the whisper was almost inaudible, soft as wind, yet unmistakably her name. The diary slipped from her grip, pages fluttering open as though stirred by an unseen breath. She stumbled backward just as the clock's pendulum began to move on its own. Tick. Tock. Tick. Tock. With each swing, she could hear faint echoes, voices layered within the rhythm, murmuring words she could not yet understand. Then, the hands of the clock shifted violently forward, striking 12 once more. The floor beneath her trembled. A hidden panel in the wall swung open, revealing a stone stairway descending into darkness. At the top of the stairwell, in the flicker of shadow and dust, stood a figure in a dark gown. And though Eliza could not see her face, she recognized the blue silk. Lady Eleanor had come down from her portrait. Eliza could not move. Her body felt frozen between disbelief and terror. The figure at the top of the stairs did not advance, but the air around her seemed to hum, a soft vibration that made the walls tremble. Slowly, the woman raised her head, and Eliza caught a glimpse of her face. It was pale as marble, her eyes hollow yet glowing faintly with silver light. The same eyes that stared from the portrait above the hearth. Lady Eleanor. Eliza, the whisper floated through the air again, distant yet close, echoing through the narrow chamber. Eliza took an involuntary step back. The floor groaned beneath her, and the diary slipped from her arm, falling open at her feet. The pages fluttered wildly before stopping on a single entry. November, 1845. The heir will come when the bloodline is thin. I hear her name in my sleep. Eliza. Her name. Written almost 2 centuries earlier. Heart pounding, Eliza looked up again, but the figure had vanished. Only the faint outline of footprints marked the dust on the top step, leading down into the darkness below. Against every instinct she had, Eliza picked up the candle from the desk and followed. The stairs were steep and cold, spiraling into the earth beneath Greystone Manor. The deeper she went, the stronger the scent of salt and damp stone became. The candlelight quivered, shadows darting along the walls that seemed to close in tighter with every step. Finally, the passage opened into a cavernous room. It was circular, carved directly from the cliff rock, and lit faintly by cracks in the ceiling where seawater dripped from above. In the center stood a stone basin filled with dark water that rippled though there was no wind. Above it hung another clock, smaller, identical to the one upstairs, its hands also fixed at 12. On the far wall, etched into the stone, were rows of names. Eliza raised the candle closer. Every generation of the Greystone family was carved there, ending abruptly with Lady Eleanor Greystone. Beneath her name was a blank space. As the candle flickered, new letters began to form, slowly, impossibly, etched by an invisible hand. Eliza Harrow. She staggered back, the flame quivering. No, she whispered, shaking her head. That's not possible. The water in the basin rippled violently, and a shadow moved beneath the surface. It rose, forming the faint outline of a woman's face, Eleanor's face, staring up from the depths. The heir returns, the voice murmured, though Eleanor's lips did not move. The tithe must be paid. Eliza stumbled backwards, but her heel caught on the stone floor. The candle fell, hissing as it hit the water. The chamber plunged into darkness. For a moment, all was silent. Then, the sound began again, slow, dragging footsteps climbing up from the basin. The voice whispered once more, closer this time. You cannot run from what you are. And as Eliza turned toward the stairway, something cold brushed against her hand, a ring, heavy and ancient, slipping onto her finger of its own accord. The metal burned against her skin, sealing itself in place. Eliza stumbled up the stone stairs, gasping for breath, her hand burning where the ring had fused to her skin. Every instinct screamed for her to run, yet the manor above seemed to draw her back as though invisible strings tugged her towards its heart. When she reached the ground floor, the air was thick with fog. The windows had vanished behind a veil of mist, and even the front door she had entered through was gone. The house was changing. A voice drifted through the air, calm, male, and impossibly near. You should not have come alone, Miss Harrow. Eliza spun around. Standing in the doorway of the great hall was a man dressed in a dark waistcoat, his features pale as though drawn from the same stone as the manor itself. His eyes were a storm grey, watching her with quiet intensity. Who are you? Eliza demanded, backing away. He inclined his head slightly. I am the keeper. The manor does not wake without a watcher, and the bloodline does not return without purpose. His tone was measured, but beneath it lingered something colder, older. I didn't ask for this, she said, clutching her hand to her chest. I'm not part of your family. You carry the mark, he replied, his gaze flicking to the ring. That alone binds you to us. The Greystone heir is chosen, not born. Eliza shook her head. No. There must be some mistake. The keeper stepped forward, his shadow stretching across the marble floor. There are no mistakes in Greystone, only debts unpaid. He moved past her and touched the wall beside the staircase. The wood shivered under his hand and began to twist, revealing a hidden corridor lined with mirrors. Each reflection shimmered faintly, but none showed her as she was. In one, her hair was streaked with white. In another, she was wearing Eleanor's blue gown. In the last, she saw herself standing beside a grave. Eliza's voice broke. What do you want from me? The keeper turned to her, his eyes softening. Not I, Miss Harrow. The house wants. Before she could speak again, a low moan rolled through the halls, deep and mournful. The mirrors rippled as though disturbed by wind. The keeper's expression darkened. It is awake. He stepped closer and lowered his voice. Listen carefully. You must not answer when it calls your name. Do you understand? What do you mean? Before she could finish, the whisper came again, her name, echoing through every corridor of the manor, drawn out and haunting. Eliza. The lamps flickered. The portraits on the walls seemed to shift once more, faces twisting in agony. Eliza clutched her head as the voice grew louder, the walls pulsing in rhythm with her racing heart. The keeper shouted above the noise. Run to the west wing. The sanctuary door, before it finds you. But before Eliza could move, the reflection in the nearest mirror stepped forward, her own image reaching out with an identical hand. And this time, the reflection spoke first. You cannot hide from what you've already become. The world around Eliza seemed to splinter. Her reflection, the second Eliza, moved with eerie grace, stepping through the glass as if it were a curtain of water. The sound of cracking echoed through the hall, yet the mirror did not shatter. It pulsed like something alive. Eliza stumbled backwards, her breath catching in her throat. The keeper had vanished, leaving only the ghostly whisper of his warning behind. Do not answer when it calls your name. But it was too late. The reflection was already smiling. You shouldn't be afraid, it said, its voice identical to hers. I'm what you left behind. Eliza shook her head. You're not real. Oh, I am real, her double replied softly. Just not in your time. Before Eliza could move, the mirrored version of herself reached out and grasped her wrist. The touch was cold as frost, and the world around her spun violently. For a heartbeat, everything dissolved, walls, air, sound, until she was standing in another version of the manor, one that smelled faintly of smoke and lilacs. The paintings were new, their colors vivid. Music drifted faintly from the drawing room. The house was alive. And standing at the top of the grand staircase was a woman Eliza recognized instantly from the portraits, Lady Eleanor Greystone. Her hair gleamed like spun silver beneath the chandelier, her eyes kind yet shadowed by sorrow. She descended the stairs with poise, her every step echoing against the polished floor. So, Eleanor said, her voice soft but commanding, the manor has chosen again. Eliza could barely speak. I don't understand. How am I here? The house keeps its own time, Eleanor said. It remembers what others forget. It shows what it must. Eliza looked around in awe. You're alive. Once, Eleanor replied. Now, I am a memory. A truth preserved by the walls themselves. The keeper guards the threshold, but she paused, her expression tightening, I am bound within it. The air shimmered as Eleanor moved closer. The curse of Greystone began with me, she said quietly. I thought I could protect my family from the darkness that haunted us, but every bargain requires blood. Eliza swallowed hard. What bargain? Eleanor reached out and gently touched the ring on Eliza's finger. This was my vow, to keep the manor alive even when all else failed. I gave it my life, my lineage, and my voice. Now, it has called you. Eliza's heart pounded. Why me? Eleanor's eyes glistened. Because you are the last. The house remembers your blood, though centuries have buried the name. You are its final heir. Before Eliza could respond, the world trembled again. The colors of the hall began to fade, and cracks spidered across the walls. Eleanor's voice grew faint. The keeper cannot hold it much longer. When the mirror breaks, the past and present will collide. You must find the heart of the house, the place where the oath was first spoken. Where is it? Eliza cried, as the room began to dissolve into darkness. Eleanor's hand slipped away like mist. Beneath the chapel. Follow the sound of the bell. And then the mirror shattered completely, throwing Eliza back into the cold corridor of the present. The walls screamed with the sound of splintering glass, and her own reflection fractured into 1,000 shards. From somewhere deep below, a single bell began to toll. Slow, mournful. Calling her by name. Eliza ran through the twisting corridors, her footsteps echoing against the cold stone floors. The air had changed, heavier now, filled with the scent of damp earth and salt, as though the sea had crept up through the cracks of the house itself. She clutched her hand, feeling the ring grow warmer with every toll of the bell. It came from below, deep beneath the chapel she had glimpsed earlier through the rain-streaked window. When she reached the grand staircase, the fog had thickened so much she could barely see the banister. But through the mist, she caught sight of something glinting, a small brass key hanging from a hook, swinging gently as if recently touched. Eliza snatched it up and hurried towards the west wing. The chapel stood in silence, its arched doors slightly ajar. Inside, candles burned though no one had lit them, their flames unmoving in the still air. Rows of pews lined the narrow space, and at the far end stood the altar, a slab of grey stone carved with unfamiliar runes. The bell's sound seemed to rise from beneath it, slow and rhythmic, each strike vibrating through her bones. She knelt beside the altar and found a small iron lock set into the floor. Her trembling fingers slid the brass key inside. It turned with a reluctant groan. A breath of cold air escaped as a section of the floor shifted aside, revealing a staircase spiraling downward into the dark. Eliza hesitated. But then, faintly, she heard a whisper, Eleanor's voice. Follow the bell. So she descended. The air grew colder with each step. The walls dripped with moisture, and symbols carved into the stone glowed faintly as she passed. The sound of the bell grew louder until it no longer sounded distant, it was right below her. At the bottom of the stairs was a vast underground chamber. The bell hung in the center, suspended by heavy chains. Around it stood statues of hooded figures, their faces hidden, their hands outstretched as if in prayer or warning. Eliza stepped closer, her lantern trembling in her grip. The floor beneath the bell was engraved with the same runes she had seen upstairs. And in the middle of it lay something half buried in the dust, an ancient book bound in leather, its pages edged with black. She opened it. The handwriting was old but precise. A record of names, dates, and bloodlines, all connected to the Greystone family. Her eyes stopped when she saw her own name, written in dark ink as if freshly added. A chill ran down her spine. Then she heard movement behind her, a slow scrape of stone on stone. One of the statues had shifted. Eliza. The voice was deep, hollow, and unmistakably human. She turned, but the chamber was empty, except for the statues. Another voice spoke from her other side, this one softer. End the vow, and the manor will sleep. The air crackled. The ring on her finger glowed red hot, forcing her to drop the lantern. Shadows rippled across the walls, and for a moment, she thought she saw faces in them, Eleanor, the keeper, and dozens of others, all watching her silently. Eliza Harrow, the voices whispered together. Heir of Greystone. Keeper of the vow. Break it, or become it. She stared at the book in her hands. The final page shimmered faintly, the ink rearranging itself into a single line. The one who rings the bell chooses the fate of the house. The bell above her swayed once, though no wind touched it. Eliza reached up, trembling. Her hand hovered over the rope. If she rang it, everything could end. Or begin again. And then. From the shadows, someone whispered behind her. It's too late. The house has already chosen. Eliza's hand hovered over the rope, the weight of the manor pressing down on her like a living thing. The bell's toll resonated through the underground chamber, each strike a heartbeat echoing with centuries of forgotten blood. She swallowed hard. The ring burned, searing her finger, yet she could not pull it off. Every instinct screamed to flee, but she knew the voice was right, the house had chosen. Eliza Harrow, whispered Eleanor's voice, drifting through the shadows. It is your time. The statues seemed to lean closer, their stone faces unreadable, yet heavy with expectation. The chamber trembled as if holding its breath. She closed her eyes and drew a deep breath. Every memory of the manor, the portraits, the diary, the mirrors, the keeper, flashed before her. The whispers of her ancestors, the tolling of the bell, the weight of the oath, all merged into one undeniable truth. She was the heir. With trembling resolve, Eliza grasped the rope. The sound of wood creaking and metal straining filled the chamber as she pulled. The bell swung, releasing a sound so deep and powerful it shook the stone walls. Shadows danced and stretched, voices rising in a chorus of anguish and release. A blinding light filled the chamber, and the statues seemed to dissolve, their forms melting into particles of silver dust. The bell continued to toll, echoing above and below, and the air vibrated with energy that was almost alive. Then, silence. Eliza dropped to her knees, gasping. The ring on her finger had cooled, but it remained, now glowing faintly with a soft blue light. She could feel the manor's presence, not threatening, but alive, calm, and waiting. A whisper floated through the air, faint and serene. Thank you, heir. She looked around. The underground chamber was empty, the bell still above her, but its sound had changed. It no longer called, it watched. The keeper appeared at the top of the stairs, his storm grey eyes softer than before. You have done what was needed, he said. The manor sleeps once more, but the oath is yours now. Protect it wisely. Eliza stood, her hand brushing over the stone walls. She felt the pulse of the house beneath her fingertips, steady and alive. The manor had chosen her, but she would not let it consume her. She would honor the oath, as Eleanor had before her. As she ascended the spiral staircase to the chapel, dawn's light began to seep through the arched windows. The fog outside the manor lifted, revealing the cliffs and the sea beyond, calm and unyielding. Eliza paused at the chapel doors, looking back at the silent grandeur of Greystone Manor. It was a house of secrets, shadows, and history, but it was now her charge, her legacy. She stepped into the light, knowing the echoes of the past would always whisper, but that she had finally claimed her place among them. Greystone Manor was hers, and she was ready.